Welcome to Write Good, the podcast that helps you write good. I'm R.S. Benedict, pronouns she, her. In today's episode, we're going to talk about why we, as a literary community, need to make space for queer fiction that is messy and unfiltered and uncomfortable and difficult and perhaps even problematic. Joining us today is horror author Gretchen Felker-Martin. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, I'm really glad to be here, RS. Thanks for having me.
Thanks. The reason I invited you on is that you wrote this really great piece for The Outline called What's the Harm in Reading? And it's about this controversy that erupted online over Isabel Fall's military sci-fi story that briefly ran in Clark's World.
Right. I sexually identify as an attack helicopter.
Right. I sexually identify as an attack helicopter. So let's talk a little bit about the story and the reaction to it, because the way the internet went after the author was, at least in my opinion, really troubling.
It was disgusting.
Yeah.
I was completely disgusted by it. It made me so sad.
Yeah. I think that was her first published story. And to have like your first published story, you know, I'm sure she's like a sci-fi fan. To have these major sci-fi writers and editors go after you like that, that's got to be like terrifying.
Yeah. What I remember is that it wasn't her first published story, but it was her first published story as a woman.
Oh.
Which is even kind of more brutal. Just like,
oh my gosh.
Immediately facing that intense moralized rejection.
Yeah, that's such a vulnerable, emotional situation. Jesus.
Yeah.
To get into it, to those of you who haven't read the story, it's this really fantastic, I think, military sci-fi story that's sort of about, it's kind of hard to sum up, but it's about a woman who's had her brain altered by the military in order to make her gender identity an attack helicopter pilot.
Right. Or not even a pilot, just she's the helicopter.
As the helicopter.
They're
so
synonymous.
Instead of identifying as a woman, she identifies as a helicopter.
Right.
And it's so interesting. I mean, it's based on, well, the title comes from this one, like, kind of gross transphobic joke, as people have called it, the right's one joke that they keep saying over and over again. And I guess she just took that joke and said, well, what would it be to actually sexually identify as an attack helicopter? What would that be? And it became this like really extraordinary, just this really interesting analysis of gender roles and gendered violence. And what really blew my mind is that she did this in a genre that is not typical for that kind of thought. Like, military sci-fi has a reputation for being very reactionary and very right-wing, and she used it to talk about
stemming from Heinlein and everything.
Oh, yeah. It tends to be, I mean, because it's military sci-fi, it's also like very pro-war, and that tends to be on the conservative side. And the fact that she thought to use this genre as a way to explore gender roles and queerness, I think is so interesting. Like, I never would have thought to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think especially, in a day and age where we've just gone through this big sort of cultural and intra-community upheaval about trans soldiers in the military and
right.
Whether we're allowed to serve or not. I'm transgender, just for the audience's edification.
Right.
I mean, my personal opinion is that the Army is a blood machine for pigs and no one should serve.
Right.
So I have a hard time getting too worked up about who has the right to tote a gun around and murder Iraqi civilians.
Right.
But it's fascinating because people equate queer liberation with the ability to participate in sort of the most destructive imperialist colonial elements of society.
Yeah.
Sort of in much the same way that we have girl-powered national politics,
Right.
That it's an act of feminism for a woman to hold some wildly cruel and oppressive office.
Right. There was that piece about a female drone pilot and just making it kind of to be like, oh, this is awesome. This is so feminist. They call her Lady Death. This woman can drone strike in an Iraqi wedding ceremony just like the men can. And this was at the same time, I think this came out at the time when we were starting to become officially aware that our drone program was hitting way more innocent bystanders than it was hitting targets. And it's just this horrific program that kills a lot of innocent people. And out of it's like, yeah, women can do war crimes too. All right.
I don't know. Maybe it was you who brought this up to me, though I had seen the essay years ago, but there's this essay from 2014 called Queering the Experience of Killing in War. It's about being a drone pilot.
Right.
And it's
drones are queering warfare.
Just the most horrific synthesis of like marginalized identity politics from an ultra individualist standpoint.
Right.
And, you know, tactical murder.
Right.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and outside of drone warfare, there's also I mean, the way we sell imperialism, the way we sell war, a lot of the time is to say, like, well, those people were bombing, they don't believe in women's rights. And those people were bombing, they don't believe in, you know what they do to gays over there? It's like, well, our bombs, you know, hit women as well as men. Our bombs hit gay people as well as straight people. Like, we're not selective. Like, this isn't, you know, we're using this thing that should be like anti-establishment or was anti-establishment in order to push like more domination. And it's
right. It's not like we're going in and giving everyone a Kinsey test before we put 2 bullets on the back of their heads.
Right. Absolutely. And I mean, the story, I don't know what the specific inspirations were, but I can't help but think of those things that are going on in the back of our culture where this story comes out of. And the way that the author kind of reclaims this like gross transphobic joke I thought was really daring and fun. And it kind of made me think of like feminist horror movies like Ginger Snaps or Teeth.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Where it's like, oh, I'm a monster? Okay, I'll be a monster. Or like, oh, feminists all have vagina dentata? All right, let's make a movie that's literally about that.
Right. Just lean in as hard as you can. And, you know, I agree with you. I think it's a really fun, interesting, beautiful story.
Yeah.
One element I really love is the ambiguity about the connections between the pilot's born body and the helicopter that she's lightly implied to be connected to in some physical way, as well as through brainwashing.
Right.
And surgical reassignment of unspecified nature. I think it's great not to get into the nitty-gritty there because it just lets your imagination run wild.
Yeah, and in that way, too, like, the helicopter is as much of her gender as, like, high heels and skirts and lipstick are for a woman.
Right,
it's
exactly.
Like, okay, it's not physically you, but at the same time, it's so considered part of womanhood.
Mm-hmm.
And the part of it that I thought was so interesting that I loved was she's got this co-pilot. He's a gunner. And at one point, he develops a conscience, and she basically accuses him of having gender dysphoria.
Oh,
and it's
so
this
good.
really interesting statement about how our ideas of manhood and masculinity are so wrapped up in violence and domination and cruelty that a man who says, I don't want to kill people, I don't want to murder people anymore, like, isn't even a man anymore.
Right. That he's experiencing some kind of fundamental spiritual conflict inside himself.
Right. And it's like, what? You're not even a man. And it's like, wow, that's just so brutal and devastating.
It cuts very deep.
Yeah. And it was just fantastic, this story. And I absolutely loved it. And unfortunately, the larger internet, particularly like writer Twitter, did not really appreciate what the author was doing. And the author got some really, really, really ugly pushback, which absolutely sucks. It got so ugly.
Yeah, it really did. It exposed sort of a lot of fault lines in our community about how we approach fiction.
Yeah.
And how we sort of moralize at and around fiction.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember in your article seeing examples of like people who were asking it to be taken down, including I remember one writer had said, I haven't read it, but I can tell from the title that this is harmful and bad. And it's like, are you kidding me?
Yes.
You haven't read it?
I believe that was Hugo winner N.K. Jemisin.
Oh, no. No, no, no. And it's not a long story. It's like a 15-minute read tops.
Right.
It's not that hard to read. It's not like a full novel.
No.
It was free and online and available to all. It's a quick read and it's a terrific read, and I highly recommend reading it.
Yeah, everyone who popped off after reading the title really has no excuse. It's just lazy.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's so clearly like a reclamation or something. Like,
Right.
I don't know.
No
like
one's going
like
to
a
use that unironically.
Yeah. I mean, the word queer itself is reclaiming an insult. Like, come
Right.
the fuck on.
Right. Well, I mean, you still see that dragged through the gutters in a million
Yeah.
internecine
Yeah.
community
yeah.
conflicts.
Yeah. But there were people who like were just attacking the writer and say just calling it harmful and saying this is bad, this is transphobic, this is misogynistic.
God, it makes me think of that Tyler the Creator tweet. You know, how is cyberbullying real? Just turn off your computer. Just close your eyes.
Yeah. And I remember some of the comments to it really bothered me because someone said like, "Oh, this made me feel bad, so it's bad." Like,
Oh
what?
my God, I know.
What?
Like, man, I hope you don't ever read like a real book for adults.
What or the entire horror genre? Like, I don't know how you cope with this.
Right, the Hellbound Heart is going to seriously bum you out, my dude.
Yeah. It's kind of bewildering. Like this, it kind of goes to this idea that all fiction needs to be written like young adult fiction, you know, like really simplistic morals and happy endings. And it's like,
Goofus and
okay.
Gallant comics. Goofus and Gallant comics, those old,
right.
I'm trying to remember what they're from, maybe like a 4-H magazine or something.
Yeah, Goofus and Gallants.
Where, you know, you have this example of Goofus, who's just a sort of jerk off kid who can't do anything right. And then you have Gallant, who, you know, sweeps in and does everything that a junior 50s husband should do.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, people unironically want that. They want the Hays Code.
Yeah.
They want to make sure that everything in the book is handled in this morally tidy way that leaves everyone totally certain of where they stand in the broader culture.
Yeah.
And it's not even an infant's way of interacting with media because children can accept ambiguity.
Right.
It's
just the idea
really scary.
I find deeply disturbing is that the purpose of a story is to make you feel good.
Yeah.
Like we're not making Happy Meals here. Like
I'm pretty sure I've never in my life written a story that I sat down thinking about, you know, how it would make people feel good, and I wanted people to feel good while reading it. That sounds so boring and stupid to me. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's just art as customer service.
Right.
Like, I'm going to give you a smile and a toy. And it's like people saw this story and are like, where's my toy? Where's my toy? I want the Batman toy.
Right.
Like, where's my Batman toy? Like, it's supposed to make you feel bad. It's supposed to kind of make you think about things. Where's my toy?
Yeah.
Oh.
You know, I think in particular, the combination of social elements going on in this story is so potent.
Yeah.
Just because the idea of the government successfully repackaging this thing that is so revolutionary to the queer and trans communities and using it to spread killing is, you know, it's happening around us.
Oh, yeah.
All the time.
Yes.
Just if you ever need to remind yourself, my personal favorite icon is when they painted a F-22 fighter jet pink for Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And it just staring at that, it's such a rich image, you know? Truly anything can be made an excuse for mass murder.
It's like in John Carpenter's The Thing when this monster disguises itself as your friends.
Yes, exactly.
In order to murder you.
Right.
Oh, God, it's hard. And I think one of the parts I really liked about the story, too, is just basically they code this violence into your gender because we'll, like, mindlessly obey gender more than any other coding.
Right. It's so ingrained, and we're so acutely attuned to the shame of getting it wrong.
Right. And like, to the point where even the sort of AI computers run by this, the enemy are kind of doing that too. They're mindlessly planting pear trees and they don't understand why.
Yeah.
And it's this great parallel, and it's just, oh God, I love the story. It's rad. And
it's really, really good. I really, really hope we see more from her in the not too distant future.
Yeah, me too. Isabel Fall, if you are one of the 8 people who listen to this podcast, please write more and publish more. You're very cool, and you're super talented and insightful.
And all the cool kids like you, and you can come sit with us.
Yeah, you can hang out with us. The cool kids like you. Fuck the haters. Fuck them. They're nerds. We'll make fun of them. We'll smoke cigarettes behind the gym together like the cool kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But unfortunately, as a result of the pushback, and unfortunately, too, it was a perfect storm of bad timing because Neil Clark, the editor of Clark's World, was recovering from surgery.
Right. He was pretty much out of commission.
Yeah, he couldn't step in to do the damage control that he really needed to do because, he was recovering from surgery. So Isabel was pretty vulnerable and ended up asking him to just take the piece down, and the piece went down, and that sucks. And it's just infuriating that the genre community saw this really interesting, provocative piece, and instead of thinking about it or even asking about it, it's just let's all condemn this person as fast as we can because it made us feel bad things. It's hey, that's how making people uncomfortable is getting them to kind of question themselves, and that's good.
Right. And to make a kind of an obvious point, men do this shit every day in much less insightful, interesting ways. They write stories that are challenging or difficult or unpleasant to look at or read. And, they basically just waltz along with their lives. But there's something about these particular online communities, so many of which have roots in the fandom communities of the early 2000s, that are just so hell-bent on blood the second they see a woman do anything.
Yeah, I have noticed that with my fiction. I tend to write very flawed protagonists, and they're anti-heroes or just downright assholes. A lot of my protagonists are just downright terrible people who do bad things. But I get so much more pushback when it's a woman.
Absolutely.
Way more. So there's this trap of likability for female characters and female writers. I deliberately use kind of a gender neutral pen name just so that I don't fall into that trap as much, hopefully. And I think women kind of fall into this trap of you have to be likable. And similar to that, queer creatives kind of fall into this trap of respectability.
Absolutely.
Isabel Fall got in trouble for writing a story that expressed these messy, complicated thoughts and emotions about gender, about queerness, about oppressive social institutions and how they exploit us. And her story was uncomfortable and wild and in your face, and it wasn't respectable. It wasn't aspirational. She didn't offer up this non-threatening, family-friendly role model.
Right.
But how many cisgender heterosexual artists do that?
And even if they were, why should we want to emulate them?
Yeah.
Yeah. The strength of the queer community has always been that it is more overt about desire and fear. Partially because for so long we've lived our lives in the open, sort of at the mercy of random strangers around us.
Right.
Just the act of, holding someone's hand or walking out your front door is a thing that could be provocation for murder. So you learn pretty quickly to get your laughs in before the curtain drops.
Yeah.
And I think in this world, post-gay marriage legalization,
right.
We live in this sort of all-encompassing security state that's very paranoid and really stokes paranoia between groups and within groups.
Right.
I think that people have become infected by the idea that those kinds of deviations from the norm are hurtful and aggressive and bad. And, it's basically that they've swallowed and internalized all the lines that the family values associations of the 1980s came up with.
Right. I do remember before same-sex marriage was legalized, there was a big argument from radical queers that in some ways it might bring more pressure to conform.
Yeah.
Like, okay, you can get married, but now you also have to have the white picket fence and the 2.3 children and
Right,
the,
absolutely.
this and the that. And I worry, like, are we really seeing that here, Like, by being, yes, you can be in a same-sex relationship, but you still have to fit into this traditional culture, this traditional hierarchy, and this traditional idea of respectability. But, like, who's deciding what respectability is?
Right. Those things happen at the top of the pyramid.
Yeah.
And I think that even the people who think this way, who have their hearts in the right place, are doing the establishment's work.
Yeah.
And there's a million sources you could point to for this behavior. The things I was just talking about, gay marriage and gay integration and assimilation.
Right.
We have an art landscape, the biggest, most visible pieces of which are just so incredibly studiously bland. Things like the Marvel movies or the new Star Wars movies that are just like, they're unseasoned oatmeal. They're nothing.
They're just like made in a lab. It's kind of like, makes me think of how, McDonald's food, it's specifically designed to, like, scientifically kind of designed to hit these measures of, like, saltiness, sweetness, fattiness, to, like, hit all of your pleasure receptors without actually tasting like anything. Because if it really tastes like anything, it'll turn someone off. It's
Right.
like, well, I don't like spicy, I don't like bitter, I don't like that, but it's just hits your lizard brain, and it's like, okay, I want this now. And that's what so much of our art by committee is. It's like, okay, our market research and our algorithms show people want this and that, and so much of it is written, like, according to a really strict formula of, here goes the plot twist, and here's what we want there, and here's the line that's going to be repeated, and it's so blah.
It's just, I agree with you in principle, but the big distinction is that the McDonald's trick works. Marvel, the last one that I saw, I think, was the newest Thor movie, and this is honest to God, this is the first time this has ever happened in my life. I fell asleep in the theater. I was just bored out of my mind.
Time well spent.
Yeah.
At least you got a nap out of it.
That's true, in a nice, cool, dark room.
Yeah, that's pretty good. So there's some benefit to it, I guess.
I'd say that's worth $12.
Yeah, you could have napped for free probably somewhere else.
Probably.
That's a problem. But anyway, this trap of respectability and blandness, it's I worry there's an idea of trying to, like, make queer art kind of fall into this bland trap, like that there's just an attempt to, instead of, like, changing the artistic and cultural landscape, trying to just, let's put a really vaguely queer character into this Marvel movie. It's like, oh, okay.
I mean, I understand why that would be of interest to some people.
Yeah.
But
it's
me,
not enough.
It's not even just that it's not enough. It's that it's demeaning to be fed from the master's table. I want no part of what they see as art. And I want to not necessarily spend all my time drumming on the heads of people who do want that. Salud, go chase your bliss, whatever, you boring fuckers. But I really want to encourage in members of my own community seeking out the art of your peers.
Yeah.
And the art of your forefathers and foremothers and forepeople, and just being more in your own world and not in this sort of zoned out pleasure panopticon.
Right.
And it's not even pleasure. It's just like brain noise.
Yeah.
It's not like they're making Bram Stoker's Dracula every few years and just like throwing crazy Francis Ford Coppola death baptism montages at you to, basically trick your emotions with some sort of laser pointer. It's just like you said, it's the same formula over and over again, and it's very dull.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like there's a difference between a story, like generic hero story number 2 with a minor queer character in it, and versus a story by a queer artist about a queer character. Like, it has a wildly different feel to it.
Absolutely.
structurally or in terms of mood, and you're going to get so much more out of that than out of like, oh, look, one of the background characters in the live action Beauty and the Beast kind of winked at a guy.
Right. Wow. That will surely usher in the revolution.
Yeah. And it just, there's more than the surface. There's something below the surface. And when this is coming from a place that's really genuine, it means a lot more. There are different ways of telling stories.
Yes.
Not just different characters in the same story over and over and over again. Disney's not going to tell you that story.
No, absolutely not. Dredging the memory banks here, but I'm thinking back to college when I took a mythopoetics course and we read Joyce, and we learned about the idea of, the feminine narrative and this kind of like fierce, circuitous interiority that characterizes books that are written by and about women, about the experience of femininity in our culture. Not that Joyce is a woman, but he's frequently cited as an example because so much of the book is about unconscious fantasies and anxieties. And I think that this connects and overlaps with queer fiction as I understand it, which is also sort of relentlessly focused on this interior experience. And I think it's because, as with womanhood, when you're queer, so much of your life happens without reflection. By and large, we're not raised by queer parents. We don't have queer friends growing up. Everything that happens to form our identities happens in this kind of fraught vacuum. And that creates a very specific kind of fiction.
Right. And there's a lot, too, in that you can't be super public about everything in a way that men kind of are.
Right.
So much is in these like very private little conversations that are not shared with the world, and stories that are not passed down and not recorded and not really taught to others and not considered important.
Absolutely.
And that kind of affects the way you relate to stories, and it affects the way you tell and hear stories. Well, like whisper networks, right? Like that's such a feminine thing to have a whisper network that I don't know if men have that kind of thing.
I don't think they do. I have been treated as a man in my life, and there was certainly just a stifling absence of any communication. Not that my experience was everyone else's, but I remember it as being just brutally isolating. Which, again, I think is a wonderful reason for us to prioritize meeting the fiction of trans people, especially, trans women who are so culturally vilified.
Yeah.
With openness and patience and love.
Right.
Engendering revolutionary behavior in your own life is not knowing all the right things or attaining some mystical level of woke where you're permanently never going to hurt anyone again. Right. It's about meeting real life situations with courage and grace and finding space for people you've been taught to revile.
Right.
And that, that often includes ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of this process, a lot of like opening this up and sort of hearing from more queer creatives, particularly trans women, a lot of this, I think, depends on everyone else to offer a little bit of breathing room.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like women and trans women, I think probably the most, are restricted a bit more in how you can express yourself and punished a lot harder for fucking it up and just given so much less wiggle room.
Absolutely.
Male authors write a lot of really problematic works, which I think is fine. It's good to have a certain amount of like openness and experimentation and anti-heroes and stuff, and that's okay. But when a woman does it, and especially in this instance when a trans woman did it, there's such a harder response. There's so much less breathing room, and as a result, our culture is a lot emptier and narrower and poorer for it. And what infuriated me the most was seeing this from people who are supposed to be kind of liberal and supposed to be like very pro LGBTQ. And effectively what they ended up doing was taking this really heartfelt and honest expression of what gender is, or what transitioning might mean, by this trans woman writer, and just scaring the shit out of her and shaming her into silence. And it's like, and, no.
She actually spent at least one night voluntarily committed.
Jesus.
Yeah. She was so freaked out and had been so intensively bullied.
Oh, God damn it.
Yeah, it's really, really sad. From what I know, she's okay now.
That's good. And we did, for the record, we did reach out to her for comment, and she's currently sort of avoiding public attention for obvious reasons. Zero blame there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good God. I didn't know that. That's horrible. How do you do that? How do you put someone in a state to the point where they commit themselves and then think, like, I'm the good guy here?
I can't even.
I did a good thing.
I think I do not stay current on animation community drama, which seems to be pretty constant.
Yeah.
But I did hear something, because I'm eternally peripheral to all of these discussions now, thanks to the 4 or 5 essays I've written.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's really great. I love it. I think 2 of the artists from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, which is a show I know nothing about, were hospitalized after suicide attempts.
Wow.
Because they had, drawn some fan art that people thought was wrong.
Wow.
Which is just...
Yeah, fandom melts your brain.
It really does.
We did a 2-part episode on how fandom melts your brain,
I'm
basically.
I'm going to have to listen to that.
It is... Yeah, it's alarming. I think what is it? Or my guest Tim Heiderich said, the big part of fandom is that the media you consume is a part of you.
Yeah.
So when when it's portrayed in a way that you don't agree with, when it changes without your permission, it's like someone's changing this part of you without your permission, and you freak the fuck out, as opposed to just going, well, that sucks. I'll watch something else now.
Yeah. I remember there was this watershed moment for me. And, I didn't grow up with fandom.
Yeah.
I was born in the New Hampshire countryside. We didn't have TV. My family didn't really have money. And I didn't have the internet until I was older.
Right.
So this is all sort of alien territory to me for a long time. And I read this article by someone. It was so impassioned about how when Disney bought Lucasfilm, and they said that they were going to reset the expanded universe, this person was like, what an act of destruction. I can't believe it. You? And I was just like, dog, those books are still there. You can read them. Yeah. The things that a company says don't actually matter, and you can have whatever relationship to art you want.
It's not real.
I know.
None of it's real. It is exactly as real yesterday as it is today. It's totally...
And it just makes me sad that people allow knee-jerk reactions and corporate memos to dictate their relationship to art.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but oh God, I could talk about that for a million years.
Yeah.
But something I wanted to bring up is in relation to this idea of respectability, this trap of respectability, there's also this trap of didacticism, I think. And at least in the mainstream, there's this unspoken expectation that queer art has to be didactic. Like, it's supposed to be educational, and in particular, it's supposed to educate cisgender heterosexual people. Here's what queerness is. Here's why queerphobia is bad. This is what gay means. And this is why it's bad to be homophobic. In this, like, really basic, remedial Queer Studies 101, or even like Sesame Street level of education. But didactic art is only one type of art. And, maybe a queer creative doesn't feel like being a teacher. Like, much of art is not didactic. It's unreasonable to expect all art to be didactic.
Absolutely.
Some art is expressive. It explores emotions. And sometimes those emotions are unpleasant ones.
Right. I can't imagine someone reading like Debbie Dreschler's Daddy's Girl and thinking like, this should really have explained to me why this is wrong.
Yeah.
Some things you have to kind of let burn through you.
Right.
Anyway, I feel like I don't even need to say that I have total contempt for anyone who thinks that all queer art should be like this. Not that there isn't good didactic art. There surely is. It's not for me.
Right.
And also, it's such a fucking weenie move to demand that everyone make it.
Yeah. It's unfair. Like, if you're belonging to a marginalized group, I think more than anybody else, you really need to express some of these feelings and some of these difficult feelings.
Yeah.
Like having to bottle it up, not just in, your day-to-day life, but also in your art, which is this place that normal people use to express themselves. I mean, that's the normal thing that people who make art do it for, is to
Right.
express it, is asking like LGBTQ creatives to bottle it up because it's too messy or too ugly or too upsetting is really fucked up and cruel.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
And something that I found so interesting about this story was this sort of body horror aspect to it. And I remember a lot of the response being negative to that aspect, this sort of body horror aspect. I mean, the idea of just being like part machine in this weird way. But so much of the horror art I love is sort of feminine body horror, like body horror about childbirth or sexuality, puberty, menstruation. I mean, one of my favorite body horror series is the Alien series, which is all about the horror of pregnancy.
Right. The universal threat of rape.
Yeah, and male pregnancy too, and it had such like interesting gender stuff going on and anxieties, and that's what was so thrilling and exciting and unsettling about it. And
I don't know if you've ever read the screenwriter Dan O'Bannon's commentary on like the ethos behind how those movies are structured and the themes they get into, but he is so tapped into what those movies are saying, and he had this very explicit idea that he wanted men to feel uncomfortable in the same way that women feel uncomfortable around dangerous men.
yeah.
So he creates, this thing that's a man to men.
Right.
This sort of third gender that just eats.
Right. Like over and over in those movies, it's men who keep getting, face hugged.
Yeah.
I mean, occasionally there will be a woman, but it's mainly men because it's just like, hey, dudes, this is what it's like.
Right.
This is what women deal with all the fucking time. How do you feel now? The only difference is that there's not like a religious lobby in the alien universe telling men, like, no, you have to carry it to full term. It's alive. You can't kill this, you whore. Like, I guess that would be the Weyland-Yutani Corporation would be.
Right. They're trying to smuggle it back home for testing.
Playing the part of the Catholic Church. I don't know. But I mean, especially for like a queer creative, there are likely a lot of themes of body anxieties and body horror that'll be, need to be explored or deserve to be explored and expressed.
Absolutely. There's this wonderful book by Porpentine, who's primarily known as a Twine author. It's called Psycho Nymph Exile.
Huh.
And it's this sort of like prose anime novella, I guess is the best way to describe it.
Huh.
And it's intensely gory. It's intensely about trans body anxiety. And there's this wonderful sequence where she's talking about sort of like the archetypal magical girl transformation from, Sailor Moon and stuff.
Right.
And this trans girl tries it and gets it wrong, and just her body basically glitches out.
Oh, God.
And starts to unspool into these unrelated chunks of femininity. And it's so poignant and so ugly and so immediately relatable.
Yeah, yeah. And in a way, I think some of that expressive art can do more to teach than didactic art can.
Absolutely.
Like didactic can get you the intellectual idea, but expressive art, in some ways, art is like an empathy machine. You can kind of put somebody in someone else's shoes emotionally in a way that you can't with other types of media. And maybe, maybe if you can explain to like a cis person, like, see that thing, that's what it feels like. They could be like, oh, fuck, that feels real bad. Okay,
Yeah,
I get
that
it
certainly
now.
speaks to my experience.
Yeah.
I think a fundamental problem with didactic art is that anyone who really needs to read it either isn't open to it or won't read it.
Right. There's also the issue, I think, of the broader spectrum of queer experience. Like, so much of art comes from our experiences, and a person's queer experience, a person's experience in queer relationships, that's not always positive.
No. There's no queer academy where we all go and take the same classes.
And I mean, same-sex relationships can also be horrifically toxic and abusive. What's their name? Carmen Maria Machado, I think, just released a memoir about a really horrible same-sex relationship that she was in recently, and it's getting a lot of really good press. That I've heard it's fantastic. But she said it was such a difficult thing to talk about, because if you're, a woman writing about how you escaped an abusive relationship with a man, there's like this very straightforward,
there's sympathy,
the Lifetime original movie format of like, okay, we know how to talk about this, but when it's a relationship between two women, it's like, I don't know how to approach this, and I'm afraid of
so which one of you is the bad guy?
Yeah, who's the bad guy? Who's the patriarchy? Well, we're both women. Who's the patriarchy? Like,
oh man. Yeah, as a as a trans woman who fled from an abusive relationship with a person who was, non-binary and much smaller than me, I can definitely empathize with the difficulty of talking about these things, because people just, the mold isn't there in their brain.
Right.
They're like, well, that doesn't make sense. You couldn't possibly have been hurt, and it couldn't have been bad.
Right.
But like all human experiences, parts of queerness are putrescent and awful in an individual and in a broader sense. And if we don't talk about them, then we will never develop a cultural understanding of them.
Right. And people who've been through that absolutely have a right to express that and process that through art, just the way everybody else does. And it's still, I mean, I do see sometimes with the sort of woke fiction crowd, there's this tendency to want to divide everybody into like a villain or a victim binary.
Right.
Like, if you're a member of a marginalized community, you're a victim. And if you're a white cishet male, you're a villain. And that's it. And it's like, no.
Yeah, right.
The world is way more complicated than that. I'm sorry to tell you.
A given number of a given percentage of any community, they're going to be just unbearable, awful people. And the rest of us are fuck-ups too.
Right.
No one is out there batting 1,000 for being the perfect queer.
Right. And I mean, especially too, if you do belong to a community that's been like stigmatized and treated like shit, like that is probably gonna affect you in some ugly ways, unfortunately.
I would agree.
Yeah, like it sucks, but I mean, that's the reality. There's that cliche of hurt people, but that's completely true. Like, people who've been hurt do tend to hurt others in this way, and the fact that they're hurting others who are also marginalized is heartbreaking, but like, that's such a truth, and you can't divide the entire human race into like, are you a villain or are you a victim, and that's it.
And
it's
what's more,
so
you can't cut off empathy or love for people who are caught in these loops, or who are, perpetuating things that have been done to them.
Yeah.
Not that you have to put up with it personally or endorse it or enable it, but like you said, you can't just paint those people as monsters and move on.
Right.
it's just another shunning is harm too, unfortunately.
And it's just a shallow, like, way to see the world. It's not a very, like, useful, constructive way to see the world. And it's a really shitty way to make art.
Oh, God, yeah. Total ass.
Yeah, like, we have tortured, fucked up, Don Drapers and stuff for straights. The queer community deserves, like, a Walter White or a Don Draper or something.
Right. Man, I was just reading this great essay about the problematic man dramas by my good friend Sean T. Collins, who's a wonderful film and TV critic. And he was talking about how the fantasy of those things is that the men are guilty.
Right.
And it blew my mind. I was like, oh shit, that's the whole thing. That's it. Now it makes total sense to me.
Yeah.
Because the real men in real life do not care.
Yeah.
They just don't. They're Michael Bloomberg. They're in the Epstein sex journal, and they truly do not give a shit.
Going, what? Why is everyone mad at me? This is some bullshit.
Right. Like, oh, you rape one child and all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Jesus.
I don't look, just get over it. Yeah, just someone's asking me to experience a consequence to one of my actions? What the fuck?
It's like that Onion article, wealthy teen nearly experiences consequence.
Yeah. Yeah, or my favorite tweet, which is me sewing. Oh, right, this rules. Me reaping. What the fuck? This sucks.
Oh, that's great.
I think that maybe makes a good segue into the idea of going beyond the sense of good and evil. A lot of Isabel Fall's detractors expressed an alarming belief that art falls into this very straightforward spectrum of helpful to harmful.
Right.
And that's it. If something is didactic and positive and morally pure and it makes you feel good and it has a happy ending, it's helpful. And if something's expressive and has negative emotions and is messy and doesn't deliver a tidy moral lesson and it makes you feel shitty, it's harmful. And for many of them, the helicopter story was harmful. It made them feel kind of bad feelings, and there wasn't some little, like, Sailor Moon segment, here's what the lesson of this story was thing at the end.
Right.
It didn't have a Hays Code happy ending where the good guys win and the bad guys are defeated and moral order is restored. So it's harmful, and it has to be condemned. And let's really unpack that mindset and talk about the horrifying consequences of it, not just for art, but I think specifically for queer art.
There's certainly a lot to be said. Something I've been talking about recently with my partner, Sam, is the mindset behind this sort of fictional fascism that everything must uphold this single monomyth about good queerness and how we fit into the world and how we're all supporting each other and healing from our trauma and doing a perfect job.
Right.
And more specifically, the sort of blind, extremely violent rage that comes when someone is perceived to have bucked that. And something Sam was telling me, they're a physician's scribe and are pretty well versed in trauma and sort of the ins and outs of it. And they were talking to me about reactive attachment disorders and how sometimes a person living with that feels something and their immediate reaction is to make anyone who makes them angry or uncomfortable feel that. So that if you're an author and you make such a person uncomfortable with your fiction, there's this extremely strong urge to push it back at you.
I see.
I need you to feel what I'm feeling. That's justice in this situation. That distress is being batted back and forth like a beach ball.
Yikes.
Which I think is surely part of the equation, at least.
Yeah.
But there is this need to be good.
Right.
That, personally just has no traction in my life. So it can be really hard for me to get my arms around it. And I think it connects back to assimilationism. That there's this idea that conformity and not really kindness, but niceness, those are desirable qualities in the queer community.
like Ellen DeGeneres
Right.
as the...
Exactly.
Like, she's nice. She hugs George W. Bush, even though he tried to stop her from getting married for years and years, and he's a war criminal. But she's nice. She's everyone's friend. That's her. That's
Right.
the ideal. And it's no.
I think ultimately what it is for me, and this is a very weird quote to pull, but Richard Nixon,
Huh.
I don't remember who he was talking about, but once said, "He's nice. I don't give a damn. Lots of people are nice. You can walk out onto the street and find 5 nice men." And it really is just sort of this unexceptional kind of meaningless quality.
Yeah.
Being inoffensive doesn't really say anything about you except that you're not offensive.
Right.
And in fact, I would say that it's correct to associate those qualities with collaboration, with people who are willing to go along with the injustice around them for the sake of not making waves.
Yeah, I can see that.
Certainly it lends itself to an in-community focus to so much of their punitive energy.
Yeah, and that I think is what we saw with the helicopter story a lot, is that there was they went after this poor girl so hard, and it's like so much harder, I think, than they would against like a cis person, maybe, who said something mildly, I don't know, transphobic or something. And I've read some statements by like queer authors about how nerve-wracking it is and how afraid they were of talking about it. I think Yoon Ha Lee was basically forced out of the closet, but generally avoided writing about trans issues because he was afraid that like he would get this kind of response for it, because he was still working through a lot. And also his financial situation was he was really dependent on his parents, and so he couldn't really out himself very much. But it's like often when you're working through something emotionally, you have these complicated feelings and you're working through them, and they don't always add up to something that's tidy. But if you can't let that out, then it's like you're going to be sort of suppressing this big part of your community, and this is something that is maybe not tidy, but it's an emotional truth that is worth talking about and is worth looking at.
Absolutely.
If that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Just no one has a clean life.
Yeah.
Even the most idyllic childhoods are sort of inherently traumatic, and we all carry that with us to the rest of our lives and into our formation as adults. And for queer people who have a higher rate of being abused by parents and partners,
Right.
we're even less likely to come out unscathed. And this idea that we can't air our wounds or just scream once in a while,
Yeah.
I think is deeply hateful.
Yeah.
But to get back specifically to this idea of moving beyond good and evil, I think, this is one of the first things that any CBT therapist will tell you, is just that those aren't very useful ideas. Determining which actions are good and which actions are bad is mostly going to be a waste of your time and everyone else's.
Huh.
Not in like a broader sense, like obviously war is bad, creating a
Right.
famine is bad.
Right.
But in terms of like how we make art and how we think about ourselves and others, you're not bad for being angry. You're not
Yeah.
evil for having had a bad life. You're not irredeemable for having written something that made a bunch of people upset.
Yeah.
And it's hard to communicate that because people really, they feel that it's one-to-one.
I'm wondering, as a horror writer, do you feel like there's actually more room in horror to explore queer issues like this in depth? Like, I read this really awesome article that was about horror cinema, and it pointed out that horror cinema has a lot more like very frank, very open depictions, not just of queerness, but also of just queer sexual acts of like gay sex in a way that you don't really see in other genres, not in like fantasy, romance comedies. There might be a gay character, but to actually
Can I
show
ask
any of that.
the name of that article?
Oh, I gotta look it up. Oh, God damn it.
I'm asking because I think I might have written it.
Oh God. I'm finding it The Abominable Act.
Yep, that's me.
Oh, God, damn it. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
That's great.
I'm very
That's
flattered.
a little embarrassing. I'm bad at remembering names attached to articles, but yes, you wrote that, so maybe you should talk about it. It's a really good article, by the way.
Thank you so much. I was quite proud of it. So basically the article says, and I stand by this completely, that within horror, which is expected to transgress, there's so much more room to depict deviant sexuality. And by deviant, I mean, in the eyes of popular culture. But there's this openness to experiences that are coded as disgusting or unacceptable within horror that you do not find in other places. Even one of my jobs before I was a full-time writer is that I worked for a lesbian romance press as a proofreader. I worked there for probably 2 or 3 years, and I would say I probably proofed 60, 70 books.
Wow.
And nowhere in any of these books, which are basically the lesbian equivalent of, beach reads or supermarket
Harlequin romance novels.
Supermarket
with
bodice
a fainting
rippers.
damsel on the cover and a man with huge pecs.
Yeah. There was basically no non-normative sex in any of them.
Oh, how boring.
It was all just like, all right, 2 women have a lot of feelings, and then one of them kisses the other between her breasts and down her chest and then performs oral sex. And it's just like, okay, I'm so glad for you and the one time you've had sex in your life. But, even within these sort of stable markets for queer experience, there is very little that pushes at the bounds of what's socially acceptable. And in horror, even if it doesn't meet with a happy reception,
right,
it's expected. I've had my share of angry readers and upset emails about things that I wrote. But I've had a lot too, more, I think, pretty definitely, from people who say like, wow, having all of this really messy, difficult stuff laid out is so powerful to me, and I feel empowered to talk about it myself. Not to pat myself on the back here. I don't think this is unique to me. I think that this is what happens when writers like, Tori Peters or Porpentine start to create a readership, is that experiences we've all been having alone start to feel more universal, and there's a sense of community that comes with that.
Yeah.
And the truth is, especially as a trans person, you're going to have a lot of ugly thoughts about yourself. For some of us, day in and day out, and not hearing that reflected in art about you,
right,
it makes you feel just as big a failure as art about cis people does.
Right. Like you're supposed to be perfectly confident on top of everything else, which is not a realistic expectation, I don't think.
Right. Or have some cute little monologue about, oh, my dysphoria, which is defined as, and then your cis friend tells you you're beautiful, actually, and then you go to the bar.
Oh, yeah. That's all it takes. If you have like a weird body image, someone tells you you're pretty, and you're like, cool, I'm cured.
Yeah, it's definitely...
My eating disorder's done.
Yeah. No, I just don't have one anymore.
Yeah, like, oh, you think I'm pretty, I'm fine. No, it doesn't work that way, sweetie.
Right. You just sort of feed things into the furnace of it until eventually you die.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's kind of cruel, isn't it? To be a person who's got so much bullshit heaped on you, and now there's this expectation that, like, why aren't you happy enough?
Right. And also it can't show.
Yeah.
And ideally you shouldn't even have it.
Yeah, it's like stabbing someone and getting mad because there's blood everywhere. It's like, you bled everywhere. Like,
right. That is so disgusting.
I stabbed you. Come on.
I'll go back to what I said earlier. I think it really is incumbent on all of us as individuals and as a community to react gently to work that queer and trans people are doing. And I think many of us really need to learn the skill to say, oh, this isn't for me. And then shut your fucking mouth.
Yeah. yeah, that's valuable. Or I didn't get this, or I didn't like this, but I can stop reading this now.
Right. And I don't need to have a take.
Yeah.
I don't need to make some kind of assumption about the author's morality or beliefs. Maybe I don't understand this isn't the best launching point for determining what kind of person wrote it.
Right, right. And just this weird demonstrative, I don't know, pissing contest or something to show like who can be the maddest at this thing. And I know the term virtue signaling is really shitty and it's usually used in like this fucked up context, but
No, this
I
is
don't
the
know what else to
appropriate
call
one.
what just happens, you know?
It's performative.
Yeah. Yeah, it really did feel like that, and it
It's
was
like you're
just
trying to shed the stink of moral transgression
right.
and prove that you are smarter and better.
Right, and and in the middle of all this, like, okay, the person you're targeting with this is an actual human being who made herself vulnerable and really raw in a way that I thought was just
Right,
amazing.
and you
And
decided to take a shit in her sunroof.
yeah, yeah,
Good work.
yeah.
We've
Well
truly
done.
seen what a nice person you are.
Do you do you feel like in terms of a lot of SFF, in a lot of terms of a lot of sci-fi fantasy, in some ways we might be kind of going backward to like the golden age, because golden age sci-fi, it was very boys adventure
Oh yeah.
type stuff, and then we kind of had new wave in like the 60s and 70s, Ursula Le Guin, Philip K Dick, these works that were very like challenging and stylistic and experimental and strange and just all over the map. But I feel like kind of now, maybe since around the 2000s, we've just gone back. Instead of boys adventure, now it's like girls YA adventure,
Yeah.
but it's this very kid like idea, this very like they're judging writing by the standards by which you judge a book for kids.
I do think that we've regressed in some ways in science fiction and fantasy. And I would feel more upset about it, except that every day I see some new trans person pop up who's just making the most beautiful shit imaginable, totally unapologetically. And that, I've made a personal decision that that's just going to be more meaningful to me than what some New York Times best-selling author does next.
Yeah.
And I don't care if none of us ever finds an agent or a publisher. I don't care if when we die our work disappears. It's there now, and
Yeah.
that's meaningful enough to me.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now that takes us to our next point, which is recommended reading. What are some of your favorite messy, grimy, unfiltered, uncomfortable queer writers or stories? And this can be genre or non-genre, just people who escape that trap of respectability and fucking go for it and tell the truth in all its glorious beauty and ugliness.
Hell yeah. So, I mentioned Porpentine earlier.
Yeah.
I really love her work. Due to ridiculous trans community bullshit, we don't talk. But that's neither here nor there. A new author I've really been enjoying lately, Briar Ripley Page, who's just starting out publishing short stories on their own. Really gorgeous, like abject body horror. There's this wonderful story they wrote about a self-loathing woman who manifests this little pin-sized hole in her chest that eats anything you put near it.
Whoa.
It's gorgeous. It's just this like endless navel-gazing retreat into what it is to think that you're unclean.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's really something. I think their Gumroad is called Flame Swallower.
Flame Swallower.
Yeah.
That's neat.
Who else have I? Oh, I love Tori Peters. She wrote Infect Your Friends and Loved Ones, which is a inspiration for something I'm working on right now, actually. And her story is about this future America in which a retrovirus has made all human beings stop independently producing sex hormones.
Huh.
So everyone has to take hormones like a trans person.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so personal. It's so messy, and uncomfortable and unpleasant, and it touches on so many of the things you're not supposed to touch on. Like, from what I understand, you're not supposed to write about how trans women do sex work anymore because it's stereotyping. Well, I think that's very stupid.
Yeah.
I was a sex worker for 2 years, and I'm not ashamed of it. It's a job that I had. I would say that it probably fucked me up less than most of the straight, like, 9 to 5 jobs I've had. Working for yourself is always kind of baseline less stressful. But so the story deals sort of with sex work and with like divides built around appearance and passing within the trans community. And it's just it's a beautiful book. There's this wonderful part that really stuck in my head where the narrator explains the term brick, which is a trans woman who is never going to pass.
Oh.
And then explains the term masonry, which is relationships between bricks, and then says that no one but bricks could have come up with such a cruel word for love.
Oh, wow.
Because you have to know something to really accurately hurt it.
God damn.
I mean, it's just incredible. Tori is really exceptional.
God damn, that is fucking devastating.
Yeah, no, it's ruinous. She also wrote The Masker, which is about this sort of fictional fetish where cis men wear full body, like silicone neoprene woman suits.
Ooh.
It's very, very, very good.
Yeah, that sounds so interesting.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Nice.
Let's see. What else have I been reading lately?
I'm seeing here Black Dresses is written on that one.
Not fiction, music.
Oh.
But they're a fantastic band. It's 2 trans women, and their songs are just like so about these sort of abject, delirious, medicated experiences of love and sex and otherness that are really unique to being trans. Let's see, right now I'm in the middle of Familia by K.M. Claude, which is this sort of Romanesque, violent fantasy book about a wealthy family collapsing under the weight of its own corruption. That's fantastic.
Nice.
Yeah. And then,
that is extremely my shit.
Yeah, it's short, but it's very, very good. It's very sexy. And I'm about to start The Pervert by Remy Boydell and Michelle Perez, which I've heard a lot about very positively from many people. I haven't actually gotten into it yet.
Nice.
And it's a little hard for me to think of examples right now because I've been just completely elbow deep in reading books about the Black Plague.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm doing this novel this summer called In Hideous Ruin, which is about a flagellant.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is cool.
Thank you. It's sort of about the experience of being in a catastrophe you have no control over and fumbling for a way to influence it, which is what the flagellants were doing. They thought that if they brutalized themselves enough, maybe God would forgive humanity and end the plague.
Right.
Which sounds pretty romantic, and it's important not to forget that they also ran around murdering Jewish people.
Ooh.
Yeah, they were not. It was not a good time to be Jewish.
Ugh.
I mean, when is? But
that's not great.
No, it's not great.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, hopefully it'll be coming out late this summer.
Yeah, that sounds fucking awesome. Where are some other places we can find your work and support your work?
So I'm on Patreon, Gretchen Felker-Martin, and I have a Gumroad store where you can buy my novel, Ego Homini Lupus, which is about a medieval housewife losing her mind in Northumberland, and my novellas, No End Will Be Found, which is about the witch trials of Wurzburg in 17th century Germany, and my science fiction novella, Dreadnought, which is about giant biomechs and, distraught teenage pilots. It's kind of like Evangelion by way of body dysmorphic disorder.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm happy with the way that turned out. So yeah, Gumroad, Patreon. I also just wrote a pretty atypical project for me. My friends Julia Graffair and Sean Collins and I wrote a zine of erotic fiction based on the Patrick Swayze movie Roadhouse.
Nice.
It's called All Fucked Up, and it's on Julia's Etsy store.
That sounds amazing.
Not to toot our collective horn here, but the Unholy Trinity really knocked it out of the park.
I bet. Honestly, I can kind of get it. I love that movie.
It's so good.
It's so just bonkers in the best way. I love it.
Oh, it's like if Star Wars were about assholes who hung out at bars.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it just the audacity of that movie too, just going full tilt. Just
God, it rules.
Yeah, there's a monster truck scene. Of course there is.
Yeah, you know what's great about that is I'm sure the only reason it exists is that he figured out he had access to a monster truck.
Yep. Oh God.
And nothing will ever top the fact that the man's name is Rowdy Harrington.
Right.
Speaking of wonderful Roadhouse writing, Sean last year wrote an essay every single day about Roadhouse. Yeah, it's incredible. And they vary from like these sort of wild digressions about the inner lives of characters to, joke meme formats. And my favorite one is he wrote this mock transcript of Orson Welles recording a commercial about Roadhouse. And it reduced me to tears. Anyway, we've pretty well gone off the rails here.
That is okay. That all sounds just utterly bananas, and I'm 100% here for it. But I think that should, since we've ended up to a strange Roadhouse digression, I think that should be it for this episode.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Raquel.
Thank you for coming on. That was really great. And thank you, audience, for listening. If you like what you heard, head on over to patreon.com/writegood and sign up. Ah, what the fuck? Cat! Let me try that again. Cat, this is usually her snack time, so she's upset. I'm sorry.
I would just like to note to the audience that my cat has been here the whole time and has been a perfect, well-behaved gentleman.
My cats are little assholes. I love them so much. But okay, let's try that. That's all for this episode. If you like what you heard, head on over to patreon.com/writegood and sign up. All subscribers get early access to our episodes and access to the Discord server, where you can suggest episode topics. Book Club members get a monthly bonus episode in which we discuss a noteworthy piece of fiction in depth. So join the club. And join us next time when we talk about what it means to be a writer during the climate crisis. Until then, keep writing good.
This has been Write Good with R.S. Benedict, hosted by R.S. Benedict and produced by Matt Keeley for KS Media LLC. This has been a Kitty Sneezes production. For comments and concerns, please write to us at writegood@kittysneezes.com. That's RITEGUD@kittysneezes.com. If you'd like to support us, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/writegood.
kittysneezes.com in color.